This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at pm-podcast.com or send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. Hello and welcome to episode 176. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast. As always, it's nice to have you with us. Did you notice that in the past few months, if you listened all the way to the end of some of our interviews, and I mean really all the way to the end, after I say until next time, after the music has faded out, that there was more? Did you notice that sometimes we added another short segment at the very end? Usually this segment started out with me saying, I have another question for you, and then our interview guest would usually have some anecdote or story to tell. Well, if you haven't heard them, you can always go back and listen to them still. But to tell you the truth, when I said I have one more question for you, well, I was lying, because usually I had two more questions for them. And while the first of those two questions was added to the end of the interviews, well, in today's episode, you are going to hear the second one more question that I asked them. So let's jump right in. You'll hear the following guests one more time: Peter Taylor, Pam Stanton, Frank Saladis, Mark Phillips, Elizabeth Harron, Jeff Furman, and Steve Kay. And now, just one more thing. Enjoy the Just One More Questions. Peter, before I let you go, let me ask you this. What was the most interesting project that you have ever worked on?
Yeah, thank you. I think that there are so many projects that have aspects of interest about them, and yeah. But the one I'm going to pick on, I think, is the one that I was told wasn't a project, and actually was getting married. It's not easy to disconnect yourself from what you do work-wise when you're a project manager. And actually planning a wedding, I approached in a project management style because there was lots to do, lots to organise, the event, the catering, the guest list, the seating plan, lots and lots of things there. And I say it's the most interesting project I worked on because obviously it ended up with the great day where I got married, and I was given some superb advice right towards the end by a senior project manager I was working with, because he said, "You're doing a great job. I can just tell you're doing a great job, and it's going to be a superb event." I said, "I tell you what, can you stop being a project manager, let's say 1 week before the wedding, and turn into a husband to be?" And that was some great advice, and I had a superb day.
Cool.
And I have to admit, we went over budget.
And I guess your primary sponsor was?
My lady wife, to be.
I assume so. Here's one more question for you, Peter. What was the most embarrassing project management moment?
Yeah, this was for me at the time. It was a big project. It was a pan-European deployment of an MRP system. And I was out in the Nordics, and I had picked up the project. I had run with it for a couple of months now. Learned all the great people that were involved in the project, got to know them, and we were moving towards a big steering committee meeting. The room was full, probably I think nearly about 20 people in the room in total, including the American contingent that had come in to see how this deployment was going on. And were they interested in picking up the deployment over in the Americas? And I was nervous at the beginning of the steering meeting, progressed well, was feeling good, reached the state of perhaps a slightly overconfidence, and was presenting up onto a huge white screen at the time. And the chairman of the steering committee asked me a question. He goes, exactly on, and we were talking about a particular part of the pilot project. He said, exactly where are we now on the project plan? And with a flourish, I grabbed a big black pen from the tables, walked over to the screen and put a big X on the screen, to which he leaned over and turned the projector off, leaving a big black X on his beautiful white screen in permanent ink. So it took a little time to recover from that.
Oops.
One. Oops, indeed.
All right then, Pam. So tell us, what was your most embarrassing project management moment?
Well, the one that comes to mind was really an embarrassment for everyone involved, but also a huge lesson. I was participating on a global team, cross-functional, at a big company. and I was representing the U.S. faction. And I was dialing in to a conference call where we had colleagues from all over the world joining, to represent their regions. And as I dialed in, as we all know, sometimes, because of the way speakerphones work, you may not necessarily hear that beep, beep that tells you that someone has joined. So as I arrived on the call, I heard a colleague from, not going to mention the European country in best interests of international relations.
Thank you.
I heard a colleague just blasting, quote, those Americans. And how every time they got involved in a project, it just screwed everything up. They dragged everything down. And he went on and on with his diatribe for about a minute and a half. And I really was trying to save him from himself, but I couldn't break through because of the duplex speakerphone. So I'm going, And finally, when he stopped, I said, "Hi, this is Pam Stanton from the U.S." There was dead silence, awkward, because everyone then was wondering how long has she been on the phone, and my screen lit up with instant messages suddenly, and I never acknowledged it. I never acknowledged it. I think that, people drew their own conclusions about whether I heard it or not, which wasn't the important point. The important point was, wow, we all really need to be very cognizant of these, communications opportunities and, the disadvantages that come with them, as well as, basic respect for our fellow team members. So, not only, fortunately, I was on the receiving end and I wasn't the offender in that situation, but it really drove home for me, what? I mean, it could have been my wagging tongue at any other moment, and that, I really need to keep myself operating in a very professional and compassionate manner, no matter what. So that was an embarrassment for everyone, but also, as I said, kind of funny. And that the fellow who had made those statements somehow evolved into my greatest fan along the way, perhaps as an apology or makeup, but it worked out all right in the end.
Frank, one more question for you. What was the most interesting project that you have ever managed?
Well, I guess I was thinking about different projects that I've been doing in the past, and one of the projects that comes to mind would be I did to me it was a large project for AT&T. The project was, I'm just thinking about it, the entire project was a $450 million project. That was the total budget for this project. And it involved consolidating a number of locations in New Jersey into one location. And it involved somewhere 9,000 or 10,000 people. And it was particularly challenging. It was a 5-building complex. There were 4 buildings to be refurbished and 1 building to be built brand new. And what was interesting about it is that we actually set up a webcam and we focused on the new building that was being built. And the building, you could actually, those people that were going to move to the building could visit the website every single day and see the construction at work. So you could see it go from a hole in the ground all the way up into this huge 15-story building, I think it was, and parking lot plus landscaping. So it was really kind of great. So people were seeing what they were going to be moving into. And I remember one of the struggles, and a lot of project managers have that struggle, is getting requirements from people. Okay, working on those requirements. And we were trying to find a way to get them to be working with us, because we're all moving from many different locations into one, and a lot of people don't really like to move. But we showed what the place would look like to move into, this brand new facility with all these latest high-tech items and so on, to kind of entice them to want to work with us. So I learned a lot from that particular project. It was one of the largest projects I ever worked on, and there was just making the connection with the people and making them feel good about the move was actually the biggest part of it.
Thank you. Mark, I have one more question for you. What are some of your funniest project management moments?
2 particular stories come to mind. They both have to do with project communication. On one side, we were a vendor in a project, and on the other side, we were the client engaging some technical services. The first one, when we were a vendor, we were called in. There was a well-established businessman who had a vision for a new service that he wanted to offer. And he brought in a bunch of people to help him brainstorm on it. And then when he needed the technology component managed, planned out, and ultimately executed, he called us to do so. So we had many, many meetings where we sat around the coffee tables and couches and hashed out all of the ideas. And we said, okay, great. I think we have a perfect understanding of what this is. So he said, okay, great. So give me a write-up of what you're going to deliver, and we'll get going. So being good project managers, we take it and we start working on a write-up. So we write up 2 or 3 page spec, really outlining what we're going to be building, what the project is going to look like. Comes back, we submit it to him, we go over it. He says, you know what? I don't get it yet. I don't understand what it is that you're going to be doing. So we thought what this meant is we need to write more. So we go into even more detail. This 3-page document becomes a 10-page document. It goes deeper and deeper into each one of the things, highlighting areas where we need more clarification. We come back a couple weeks later, sit down. He's like, you know what? I believe that you are the right person to do this job, but I'm not understanding a thing you're putting on paper. And I said, okay, tell me, like, what's an example of what you don't understand? He said, well, let's start from the top. When you say that the first thing you're going to do is write a specification, I said, what's a specification? So we realized we were talking completely different language. And the deeper we went into our language, our specific project management process language, the further away we were getting from things that he would understand. So I said, now I understand what you want. We came back, we wrote basically a paragraph that said, we are going to build your vision that does X, Y, and Z in a very general sense. You know, basically details will be fleshed out later. He looked at it, he said, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Now I know that you understand what I want to build. Let's move ahead.
All right. And the second one?
Well, the second one, we were on the other end of the table at that time. We had acquired a software product several years ago, which was written in a language that we didn't have in-house a lot of the capabilities to support here at Vertibase. So we were looking to solve certain problems in the software and really improve it. So we got recommended a very high-level, well-referenced IT company that had worked with some of the most prominent names in the world on providing IT services. And I came to them, I said, okay, here's the software, here's the code, you know, obviously we signed all the right agreements, and I said, we need to have it fixed so that it does X, Y, and Z. They said, okay, great, it's going to cost this amount. We even gave them some money. And so we had a meeting, and I said, okay, great. When can I expect this to be done? Or when could we expect this to be done, you know, representing the company? And he said, well, we understand that you need to solve these problems, but tell me specifically which lines of code do you need modified and in what way? I said, I don't know. That's why we came to you, right? We want this problem solved, solve our problem. They said, I understand you want this problem solved, but how would this problem be solved? Where is it located? So I realized at that point that there was a complete mismatch in terms of the kind of information that we were going to be able to provide them with, and the kind of information that this supposed project manager and account manager interface really needed to then be able to convey the deliverables or the executables to the team. So I said, you know what? I don't think it's going to work. And you know what? They very nicely gave back our money, and we called it a day.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I have one more question for you. What's the strangest thing that you have ever asked a sponsor?
Oh, well, this is quite a long time ago now, but I wrote a project initiation document for a intranet project, and I was absolutely convinced that the sponsor wouldn't read it. Absolutely convinced that he would just flick straight to the end, read the executive summary, sign it, give it back, and not pay any attention to the detail. So in the body of the text, about halfway through, I had written the roles and responsibilities of everybody, and under his roles and responsibilities I had put must provide chocolate for project manager on a weekly basis. and he read the PID from start to finish, and he gave it back to me, and he said it's perfectly fine apart from the bit about the chocolate. And actually I was quite embarrassed because I was so convinced that he wouldn't discover this, and I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't discovered it, to be honest, because I couldn't exactly have pointed out that I caught him out. I would have demanded my chocolate after a week. Yes, so that was good.
Jeff, before I let you go, one more question for you. What was the most interesting project that you have ever worked on?
Well, I worked on a fantastically interesting project called Y2K. I'm one of the few PMs who admits to working on it. However, it was an incredibly interesting project, and we all really put a tremendous amount into it. As soon as you said the most interesting, it really came to mind because there was so much newness about it. There was sort of a vast, all kinds of things to test, and it was sort of uncharted territory and just a very gigantic scope. We had to test every program in the company, every application, every date field in all kinds of formats. And it was very challenging. And also it was interesting because a lot of new products were coming out to help people with the Y2K. So we felt like we were doing very cutting edge work, testing all kinds of new software from the big vendors. Also, it was the first exposure to the PMO for myself and for many others. So it was such a big project that the company brought us to work on their PMO with Y2K. And that was very valuable. That's how we all learned about the PMO and PMI for the first time. The humor of it was that people later came to kind of hide from saying they worked on Y2K, but we all did quite a lot of good work there. And you asked kind of what's a funny thing that we worked on, so there became a funny element. It sort of was disaster planners gone wild is how it later became perceived.
Steve, before I let you go, I have one more question for you. What was the most interesting project that you have ever worked on?
This was a good one. The CEO for a nonprofit in Riverside, California, called me up once, and she said, "We need your help. We would like you to come out and speak to our consumers about communication skills." And she said, "Of course, you know that our consumers are special. They've been identified as dual diagnosis. Now, if you've studied psychology, you might know what that means. In their case, it means that these people have two challenges. They're challenged with a mental illness, and they're also challenged with an addiction. So this meant I would have people in the audience who were, for example, a bipolar recovering alcoholic or a schizophrenic recovering drug addict. And then she said, you need to know something about this audience. Don't wear a suit. Don't bring slides. Don't bring notes. Just dress casual. Because if you do anything that looks like the establishment, they will leave you in an instant."
You accepted?
So just come out and talk. Yeah, I said, sure. Why not? I like challenges. But, while I'm describing this, have in your mind, how did he do this?
Yes.
Okay. Then she said, there's more that you need to know. They're afraid. They're skeptical. Almost all of them have been abused. And I suppose you could say that's normal because in our society, many adults attempt to fix strange behavior by being violent. So children who have mental illnesses are unusual, and their parents probably tried to fix them by being violent. So almost all of them have been abused, and most of them had been in jail. And that's to be expected because drug addiction, alcoholism often cause people to be arrested and put in jail for the behavior or the use of these things. And she said, but we really need your help. So could you come out and talk to us about communication skills? So how'd I do it? Well, I showed up without any notes and casual clothes and no computer. And I arrived early. I always arrive early. My plan is to be on site an hour before a commercial event. And so I was the only one in the room. And then they arrived. And they arrived all at the same time. And I figured out that they did that because they came by bus. And the reason they came by bus was none of them had driver's licenses. And again, you could say, well, that figures because
Right.
if you've been arrested for drug addiction or drug possession or you're an alcoholic, or if you have a mental illness, they'll take away your driver's license or they won't give you one. So they all arrive. They all file into the room. And after they arrived, I mingled with the group. I introduced myself. Hi, how are you? And asked them how they're doing. And so I held small conversations with them here and there. And I remember one of the conversations especially well because I asked this young fellow, "How are you doing?" And he said, "I'm lonely." And I looked at him and I said, "You know, you're handsome, you're strong, you're smart, you'll find somebody." The guy almost cried. His whole body went through a wave, his face crunched up where he had to, just bite back and hold back the emotion. And what I did here is really special and worth noting. I gave him hope. And to me, that is one of the most important attributes of an effective leader. They give hope. They inspire people through hope. There are some people who sell fear. They scare people, and then they present themselves as the solution for the scare that they have created. But here's somebody who really, his life is a disaster, okay? And he's lonely. So I said, "You'll find somebody." I gave him hope. Okay, so they called a meeting to order, and I'm introduced. Here's Steve Kay. He's going to talk about communication skills. And I remember even feeling a bit awkward at first, and I suppose that could be because I always mirror in my mind the mindset of the audience, and I felt maybe they're confused, so I felt confused. I do know that I said communication is important, and I'd like to know how I can help you. So could you call out what you'd like, and I'll write it on this piece of chart paper. And so people asked for things, and I made a list, and after about 10 items, we were done, maybe 12. I know I filled the page. And so then I stopped, and I, for dramatic effect, I stopped and I looked at it for a moment. And then I turned to them and I said, "You know something? I speak to executives in major corporations, and they ask for the same things." So, we have a lot in common here. And now let's talk about how we can fix these things. And we were now on our way. And the presentation was so successful that they asked me to come back next month and spend another 2 hours talking about communication some more. But notice there's some attributes here. One of them is expectations. I expected that these were human beings. You can imagine all sorts of other possibilities. And perhaps I set your thinking in a sad course by describing this group. Certainly my client, I had a rather rough description of what to expect. And yet my foundation expectation is these are human beings with feelings who could use some help with their communication skills. That was my mindset. And when I mingled with them as if they were ordinary people who had ordinary lives and would be interested in what I had to say. And with that expectation, I then was able to manage my behavior so that I was consistent with it. You see, by treating people as if they were okay, I then made them okay, which led to having a successful program. And the message for project managers and leaders is that by expecting good results, expecting people to do well, expecting people to even want to do well, will cause your behavior to reinforce that and make that a reality. So this was the most memorable presentation I've ever given, most memorable project I've had. It had some very special attributes, and I'm very proud of how it went. Thank you for asking.
Thank you very much, Steve. And that was just one more question that I had for Peter Taylor, Pam Stanton, Frank Saladis, Mark Phillips, Elizabeth Herron, Jeff Furman, and Steve Kay. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a PMP or a PGMP, and you're looking for a simple and effective way to earn your PDUs, then try our sister podcast, the PDU Podcast. Get a new webinar and at least one new PDU every month on autopilot. Stop by at pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. The trick isn't coming up with projects. The trick is making them happen. Until next time.